What up guys, Blue Spooky here. As always, just wanted to let you know that some of the stories in tonight's video may be stories I've read before. I tried my best to get new ones from the stories I have access to, which is all the tabs I currently have open, but there seems to be an area outage where I am of the internet, so I'm not really able to open any new stories or anything like that at the moment. Hopefully that will get resolved by tomorrow, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the stories anyway, and I hope you have a good evening. Thanks for understanding. Anyway, on to the stories now. My friends Jessica and James have been together for roughly 6 years, and they've lived in their house for over a year now. I'm over quite often as well. I've been friends and co-workers with Jessica for 4 years. They're both wonderful people, and they've kind of adopted me into their family. They keep me alive by feeding me a few times a week, so I'm very grateful to them. I was over for dinner after work a few weeks ago. We all arrived at their place within minutes of each other. We all drank and caught up, and after a little while, James went outside to grill up some steaks. He came inside, though, and asked why I'd kissed the door. I was pretty confused, of course. I went over to the sliding glass door where he was. Sure as the world is round, there was a kiss print on the outside of the door, lipstick and everything. Few things first. James and Jessica are both shorter than I am. He's about 5'8" and she's 5'2". I'm 5'11". The kiss print was at a height that if I popped up my balls on my feet, I could just barely reach that spot with my lips, far above where either of them could reach. I hadn't worn any of that sort of stuff in many years. They both thought it was me playing a prank on them for some reason. Jessica owned the lipstick. I guess they thought I could have just been trying to freak them out or something. Spoiler alert, it was not me. I happen to be a smoker, so I did frequent their back porch through that door. I guess that made it all the more suspicious. Their porch was pretty difficult to get to as well. We got 3 sides, right? Well, the right side is a 30-foot drop, the left side is a 10-foot drop with a spiked fence, and inside that fence is immediately James' grill and some workout equipment. It was a pretty narrow, not easily navigated space. The front of the porch, I suppose, would be the easiest way to get in, but you'd have to be quite dedicated to climb all that way. They had real thick, tall hedges around the entire thing, too. You'd get pretty scraped up trying to do all this. At this point, I was thinking Jessica just climbed up on a chair and was trying to prank me or something. James cleaned off the glass, and we quickly went on with our night. A few nights later, though, I'm back at their place. I was going outside for a smoke when I saw another kiss mark on the glass, in the same place as before. About a foot below that was a smudgy heart drawn in dirt crudely. I'm not sure if this person had really greasy hands or if they used spit or something, but that was extra creepy. I pointed this out to my friends, and again they thought it was me. James even insisted I clean it off. None of us were the type to prank exactly. I still felt the most logical explanation was Jessica was doing this for some reason. The next time it happened, a few days later, I hadn't been there for a while. Jessica called me up. She was a little bit accusatory and rattled, of course. I did have a key to their home. She asked me if I had used it to go inside and write something on the glass again, because when they'd woken up, they noticed some writing on the door. I told her it was not me. She let it go, but I could still tell she was kind of suspicious. At this point, I knew it wasn't her either. It could be, but she would have given up the ghost already. She seemed to be genuinely mad and scared of me. It didn't seem funny at all. It happened many more times as well. Once even when I was over there. Then there was a break for about a week. Then it started up in earnest when I wasn't there for a while. I had to go to another state for work. While I was gone, Jessica video called me. She saw I was in my hotel room, not there, and just started freaking out. She said this whole time she'd really been holding out hope it was me. At least then it wouldn't be terrifying. Alas, I was 1,000 miles away. There was new writing on her back door, seemingly made that very same night, with a heart drawn underneath as well. She apologized to me for being so adamant it was me. She just hadn't wanted to be wrong. I told her it was okay, but also told her the person she should really be calling right now is the police. She did call them, and they came several hours later, looked around for 5 minutes, and pretty much just told her, "Hey, that's weird." They told her she could take some pictures and submit them online. Wow, thanks guys, what a big help. We were all completely freaked out. We don't really know what's going on. They ordered a camera and it came a couple of days ago. They put it on the porch, but so far nothing. I'll let you know if anything further happens. About 10 years ago, after graduating from high school, me and 5 of my friends, all girls by the way, decided we were going to rent out a house together right by campus. We were all fairly young, 17 to 19 years old, and very broke as well. The house wasn't exactly in the best neighborhood. One night, we had some people over. Nothing crazy, just a few of our friends. We were all hanging out on our front porch and having a few beers together. We called it a night around 1 or 2 a.m. All of our friends went home and we all went to bed. The next morning, we were woken very startlingly to a knock from the police. One of the girls let us know the cops were at our door, so we all came downstairs in a panic. Naturally, we thought we were in some sort of trouble. The officer informed us there had been some sketchy activity on our front porch last night. At first, we thought he was talking about us having a party with people over, but no. Apparently, sometime after we'd gone to bed, there was a man in his late 40s or early 50s, looking through all our windows. The officer had just happened to be driving by and saw the man peering in. When the man saw the officer, he frantically grabbed an empty beer can off our front porch and sat down on one of our chairs. He pretended to be drinking. The officer obviously thought this was even stranger, so he stopped to see what was going on here. He asked the man if he lived in the house. The man had told him he was a close friend of ours and that all of us had just turned in for the night. He'd decided to finish his beer before he took off. He started describing things about us in a horrifying amount of detail, even some things he shouldn't have known. It seemed he'd been watching us for some time. I'm sure the officer could tell some sketchy shit was going on here, as he offered to give the man a ride to wherever he lived. The man hesitated for a moment and insisted he simply wanted to finish his beer. The cop just told him to come with him. When he did a search of the man's name, tons of charges came up. The scariest part was all the charges of pedophilia he had, quite a lot of them. Thank God for that officer driving by. We checked our windows the next day, only to find they'd been unlocked, and some of them had been tampered with. This guy would have had no trouble at all climbing through one of those windows while we were asleep. Needless to say, we made sure every window was secure in that house, and we were a lot more cautious of our surroundings from then on. The cop actually gave us the name of the man, so we could look him up along with all of his pages of charges. This guy was terrifying. One of those people where you can just tell from the look in their eyes that they're not someone you want to associate with. Still gives me the chills to think about. Warning, this story has some graphic details. So I'm just gonna get it out there because it's been heavy on my shoulders for about a month now. The night of National Day here in my country, after having a nice meal with some of my friends, my boyfriend asked me to go check on one of his friends. They had a father-son kind of relationship, and his friend was not feeling very well. He had some heart-related conditions, and my boyfriend was quite worried. On our way home, we decided to stop by his place real quick, around 10 at night. We got there, drank a beer, had a friendly chat with him, his wife, and his stepson for a moment. After about 45 minutes, we were just about to leave when we heard a crazed howling coming from outside in front of the house. In retrospect, it almost sounded like a zombie's growling. His stepson cautiously opened the door and asked what was going on. He didn't even have time to finish his sentence before a man erupted at the door. He was covered in blood. I mean dark black dried blood. So much of it I almost thought he was a different ethnicity because his skin had such a dark tone from all that blood. It took me about 30 seconds to realize that all that blood was coming from 2 gigantic, gaping wounds in the side of his head. I must say, he looked and sounded like a living corpse. There were 3 gashes. The biggest was on the middle from his forehead all the way down to the back of his head, 2 inches wide at the largest. The guy began to scream and yell and thrash around before falling to the ground and freezing just like in the movies. We jumped into action. This guy was clearly not in good shape. We brought him out without looking back. I can't really explain what went through my mind in that moment, but I knew that if we were not on our way to the hospital right now, this man would not survive. I sat him down on the front passenger seat and did my best to keep him awake while my boyfriend drove. We called 911 the minute we got onto the road so they could send an ambulance to meet us on the way there. The agent on the phone started asking me to pull the car onto the side of the highway and wait for the ambulance to get there, but we couldn't do that. The man was clearly going to die very soon. We kept on going as fast as possible. We arrived to the hospital before the ambulance and the police. As soon as we got there, medics rushed outside and came to help him right away. The police then arrived too, and took our disposition. Guess what happened next, though? The man had been so badly hurt that he fell into a coma only 30 minutes after arriving, before the police could interrogate him as to what happened. From that moment on, police started procedures for a homicide investigation, and we were considered the prime suspects. They finally let us go home at 4 a.m. They came back the next day asking further questions and letting us know that now they knew we were not related to this crime. They informed us the man had also escaped the hospital the next morning. The attack was probably gang-related, and those gashes had been done by a machete. He'd managed to survive the attack because he was completely strung out on heroin. I'll never forget that night, and that man's horrifying screams. At least I can hold on to the fact that I helped to save a life. I've been wanting to share this for a while, so here goes. In 2007, when I was 12 years old, my family and I took a trip to Key Biscayne, Florida, with some of my cousins and family friends. Naturally, while at the resort, my cousins and I would all hang out at the kids' club. Well, there were always a bunch of kids to hang out with, epic chicken fingers with ranch dressing, and tons of fun games for us all to play. There was a director of the kids' club who watched us and facilitated all of the activities. His name was Dan. In retrospect, I'm sure you can imagine Dan was a major fucking creep. He was around 40 years old, super tall, skinny, and was balding quite badly. The worst part is that he always made us call him Dan the Animal Man. Side note, these sorts of memories leave me in awe of how naive and blinded to danger I was. I'm sure most of us were as a kid, really. If I ever met this guy now, I wouldn't want to get within a 5-foot radius of him. At 12 years old, though, I was thinking he was awesome. Time is a wonderful thing, I suppose. Anyway, I digress. It was made clear to all of us suddenly that Dan, for unknown reasons, was leaving the hotel in a week. None of this fazed me, though. On our last day there, I just so happened to lose my cell phone. It was a bright blue chocolate cell phone, if anyone remembers those gems with the spinning wheel. I quickly told my parents I couldn't find it. Considering this was already the second phone I'd lost that year, my mom yelled at me and told me if I didn't find it, I'd be grounded for a long time. I rushed around the entire hotel, looking everywhere for my phone. Along the way, I just so happened to go into the kids' club to see if anyone there had found it. The room that was typically bustling with kids and activity was now eerily quiet and empty. Dan was just sitting on a couch all by himself. "Hey, Dan, did you by chance see my phone?" I asked him. He responded right away. "Oh, yeah. Actually, I found it and put it in the lost and found in the basement. And come with me, I'll show you." Thinking nothing of this, I mindlessly followed behind Dan as he led me all the way to the back of the hotel. We had walked for around 3 minutes before we arrived at the foot of an abandoned stairwell leading into a dark basement. We were now at the very back of the hotel, in a strange area I'd never seen before, and no one else was in sight. "Are you sure it's down here?" I asked, very confused. I was staring down a long flight of stairs leading into pitch black darkness. The walls were made of unpainted concrete. It didn't even look like it could be a storage area, let alone a basement with a lost and found. Dan nodded happily and held the door open for me, motioning for me to head down myself. Something in that moment suddenly woke up. I'm not sure if it was instinct, fear, or just luck, but I immediately knew I could not go down there. Before Dan could say or do anything, I blurted out, "Never mind, I think I left it with my mom." I darted as fast as I could back to the hotel lobby. I was shaken up. Something about that situation was not right. I just knew he was going to hurt me. As a kid who wore rose-colored glasses and was overly trusting of others, that really shook me. I tried to compose myself and figured I'd investigate a bit more just to be sure. I walked up to the concierge of the hotel and asked them where the lost and found was because I'd lost my phone recently. The woman at the front desk was very nice and told me the lost and found was just right there, right next to her. She then asked me what kind of phone I'd lost. After I told her it was a blue chocolate flip phone, she smiled and pulled it right out of the box under her desk. "Don't worry, someone turned it in here earlier," she said and handed me my phone with a big smile. "Wait, so you're telling me the lost and found isn't in the basement?" I stammered. "No, sweetie, the hotel is still under construction. The basement is being rebuilt. There's not even any electricity down there or anything." That scared the absolute shit out of me. I couldn't shake the feeling that man was dangerous. At the time, I was sharing a hotel room with my cousin, and she was the only person I told. Considering she was only 8 at the time, I think all I did was really freak her out. Now I'm 26 though, and I think back on that moment a lot. I wonder what would have happened to me if I'd gone down to the basement with Dan the Animal Man. It truly feels like one of the most critical junctures of my entire life. I'm happy I knew to get the hell out of there before it was too late. I recently contacted that hotel to inquire about past Kid Club employees named Dan from 2007, just to see if he's still around somewhere, or on a sex offenders list, maybe even in jail. I told them this whole story, but they refused to give me any information about him and sounded pretty sketchy about it, honestly. I'll continue to do some research, and if I ever find more information, I suppose I'll tell you guys as well. My name is Leia. I live in the north of France in one of the houses in a family neighborhood. I was 15 years old when this story happened. My parents were separating. My mother was a nurse, so I was often left at home alone. It was November of 2021, I believe. It would get much darker much earlier around that time, so that meant I was home alone in absolute darkness. Around 7 p.m., I heard some knocking at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone to come by though. I was paralyzed in surprise. A few minutes later, the knocking repeated. I looked in the peephole of my door, but I couldn't see anyone there. I thought it must be a prank by children in my neighborhood or something. The knocking stopped just a few moments later, and nothing else happened for 4 more days. It was a Saturday this time. I had invited 2 of my girlfriends to my house, Luis and Satine. That day, my mother was at work. We were watching a movie in my living room when I went to pick up my charger in my room. My 2 friends were alone downstairs when they heard those same knocks as the night before. Their first thought was that my mother was coming home early. They didn't know about that previous incident. They opened the door, only to see no one was there once more. The three of us were confused. We didn't know what was going on. Luis reassured us though, telling us surely we were creating this stress in our heads. Maybe it was just a coincidence with that knocking from last night. The rest of the evening went over quite well, and nobody knocked for the rest of that night. That's what I told myself at least, until next Wednesday night. I'd just come back home from the grocery store after buying some pasta. After eating, I went back to my room to finish my homework with my headphones in. I was listening to some music. Suddenly, I began to hear banging against the walls. Naturally, at first, I thought this was my rabbit, getting angry and thumping because he was hungry. After a few blows, though, I could hear things moving around on their own. I took courage with both hands and decided to bravely go down to the living room. In the reflection of the mirror in the hallway, I saw the silhouette of a man tapping on my window with a crowbar. I was petrified. The man still hadn't seen me. He then came to knock on the door, the exact same patterns as the other 2 times with his crowbar. Still grasping all my courage best I could, I grabbed a knife. I quietly walked over to the front door. The man was tapping with his crowbar louder and louder. I shouted through the door, telling him to get fucked, and that I was already on the phone with the police. As soon as he heard that, he ran away, and he didn't come back after. As soon as he left, I really did call the police. I was bluffing when he ran away. After hanging up, I cried. I thought that would have been the last moments of my life. He looked like he was about to try and break the window in. 10 minutes later, a patrol arrived, but they couldn't do anything except patrol regularly around my home. The man was never caught or arrested. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't heard the noises that day. This was the moment when I was most scared in my entire life, and it changed everything for me. Let me start by saying this is something I've had to go through, and there are still some things about it I don't really understand. I don't talk about this to anyone in my personal life, really. Not because of how painful it is, mind you, but I just don't like people's reactions to it. No matter how well-intentioned the other person is, it tends to alter relationships permanently. And though over the past 21 years, I've learned to talk about what really happened, I'll tell it from my perspective from back then, the way I remember it. I lived with my mom at the time. My parents had been divorced for 3 years, which for a 7-year-old is pretty much your entire life. My mom back then was someone who took extra care with me. She didn't like it when I played in the yard. She didn't like it when I spent a lot of time at our neighbor's house. Always personally dropped me off at school and was waiting for me at the end of the day to take me home. She taught me to lock all 3 locks on our door and how to see what different cars were parked outside and which ones were familiar. Of course, stranger danger. She was, I now understand, paranoid. There's lots more things, but I'll just skip all that. One night we were sitting on the couch watching TV when a small pickup truck pulled into our driveway. This was really strange. We weren't expecting anyone. Even worse, though, was my mom's reaction. I'd never seen her move so fast. She leapt up from the couch to make sure the door was locked. Then she ran to me, picked me up hard, and carried me to her bedroom and back. She told me to hide underneath the bed. She ran out of the room and closed the door behind her. I heard a man pounding on the front door. Then she started yelling and screaming at him. All of a sudden there was a giant crash. Moments later, the bedroom door flew open and my mom ran inside. There was a big man behind her. I could see the cuffs of his jeans and the toes of his black and brown shoes. My mom was screaming. She tried to turn around and slam the bedroom door shut, but suddenly it pushed open and she was thrown onto the bed right above me. The heels of her bare feet were by my head, hovering just a few inches off the floor, and the man's shoes were in the doorway. There was complete silence for a moment before my mom started to quaver audibly. I heard 2 really loud pops, and nothing moved. The man's feet ran away. I heard his truck start and pull out of the driveway. I waited for my mom to come and get me. Her feet slid down to touch the floor, and the rest of her did too. Her hair was all messy and frizzy. She had her back turned to me, curled with her knees against her chest, and her nightshirt was up in her armpits. I put my hand on her back and was about to ask her if she was okay when I saw a pool of liquid coming toward me from under her body. I flew away from her, out from under the bed and onto the other side of the room. I was probably screaming at her or something. It seemed like just a few seconds had passed, pressed hard against the wall as I could with my face buried against the baseboard, before I began to hear sirens. It was a big city, so I was used to that noise, but it got louder and louder. Now more feet ran through the front door and into my house. I thought the man had come back. I heard people yelling police, and thought that's what I needed. I needed the police right now. The rest of the night, feet stomping, blankets wrapped around me, I was whisked past my mom so I couldn't see her. I remember really wanting to tell them to help her, but I couldn't find a way to get the words out. It took a long time for me to forgive myself for that. Of course, they were going to help her. And they put her into an ambulance while I stood on the front lawn and watched. I followed in a police car behind. Never really got the chance to see her again. They said she died in the ambulance. I saw her at the funeral, of course, but that wasn't really her. The questions answered later don't really help that much, but here they are. My dad had cheated on my mom, and my mom cheated on my dad in revenge. The guy she was with decided to leave his own wife for my mom. My dad left because everything was so messed up. My mom felt really guilty and broke it off with the guy. He was very upset with how she'd ruined his life. She had been worried about him for years after. He found her through a mutual friend, and that was that. The man went back to his apartment after and killed himself too. There was a lot of time with the police. I talked to a lady in a room in front of a camera. My dad came and took me to his house to live with him. It was an extremely confusing time. I realized in that moment there are two English languages, one that kids speak and one that adults speak, and only adults are fluent in both. They would have conversations with me in that foreign tongue, going above my head, then switch to child language and say, "Now tell us what you saw. You're going to live with me now," and stuff like that. That's my scary story. My dad really wasn't all that into kids. I just kinda pulled inside myself and worked on school. I went to college, have a good job, have good friends, all of that. But I've learned not to speak about this. The internet is great for anonymously talking about things. But I'm not sure if this really helps anyone. It's just a sad and scary story. I've spent most of my life only talking about this to therapists, and despite what you might think of seeing it on TV, it's actually really helpful. I remember every moment of that night, every breath, every footstep, every loud noise and whimper, and I always will.